Joanne, if you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Joanne Caruso, and I am the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer at Jacobs.
Thank you so much. Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Wada. I'm Group Vice President for Corporate Strategy, Innovation, and Transformation at Toyota Financial Services.
Thank you. Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Strafel, founder and CEO of Summit.
Awesome. And Tom, for good measure?
Yes, I'm Tom Foley, pulled together the Culture Roundtable, and I am founder and principal of Indigo Group.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. We are here today as a part of the Culture Conversations, and we are going to talk about inclusive leadership. One of the first things that comes to mind, and one of the first things we want to talk about, is how diversity, equity, and inclusion have an important part to play in inclusive leadership. There's a lot of really good and easy textbook definitions and examples, but we've brought these leaders together today to talk about how separately diversity, equity, and inclusion contribute to their inclusive leadership styles. Joanne, you want to get us started?
Sure. I think one of the most important things that I have learned over the course of time is, first of all, how important leadership at the top is to actually making an inclusive workplace. Because if it's not coming from the top and the leaders do not actually vocally and demonstrate their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's likely that it's actually not going to penetrate into the organization, because people won't actually believe that it's important, even if others in the organization are actually talking about it. So that's, I think, the first thing. I think all of those components, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are very important, because you need them all to actually have an inclusive workplace. You need people who come from different backgrounds, are different ages, have different experiences, to actually make that conversation just richer, and to just really be able to understand where everybody's, coming from as you work together. And then in terms of the inclusion, where I really think of inclusion as belonging, where everybody, no matter what their race, gender, age, sexual orientation, feels that they belong and they can truly be themselves and bring their whole selves to work. And of course, equity, just making sure that there are equal opportunities available for everyone and equal resources so that they can actually take advantage of those opportunities.
Julia, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Joanne is talking about. And I like to talk about a couple maybe more relatable definitions. So I maybe many of you have heard Verna Meyer's quote about diversity being invited to the party and inclusion being asked to dance. I like that. And one of the things that I've added is that what we're really trying to do, and I think Joanne talked about it kind of as belonging, is I want to create an environment, Toyota wants to create an environment where actually you're there and you can't wait to bring your best dance moves. So you're a place where you know that people will be excited about what you have to bring forth. And even if you fail, they're going to help you make it better, and you'll feel great about being able to contribute. Like, that's when you get to that belonging, right? And you get to drive innovation and creativity. So I like that analogy. And then in terms of equity, you may have seen the picture of 3 children at a fence, looking over the fence, right? And the tallest child doesn't have any problem looking over the fence, and he can see beyond the horizon. But the other 2 need some help, right? One of them needs 1 box to stand on to be able to look over the fence, and the other might need a couple boxes. But being able to provide that is, in terms of equity of the opportunity to see what's over the fence, is a way to help people understand what's the difference there in terms of equity and what we're talking about. And when it comes to the workplace, or maybe career opportunities, if you think about it, right? What can a leader do to support their team members see those career opportunities? Might be a way to think about it.
Absolutely. And Eric, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, and I think going back to Joanne's point, it does start at the top. And I've talked to quite a few leaders that come across of course I'm inclusive, and of course I believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're vocal about that with their leadership team, but the rest of the organization doesn't know. Right. And so I think it's a conversation like we're doing here. I think it's really important to get out and talk about it at all levels of the organization. And even though people and leaders have the right intent, not everybody may know that. And so you really have to get out there and understand where you have blind spots and where you have gaps. And, a couple things I've come to really believe as a leader that you've got to do. One is listen. And it's not only to where you're at today, but where you're going. And we now work with companies coaching to develop an inclusive strategy. And that strategy starts with a vision that everybody can see themselves in. And that's a lot harder to do than you think. And so to have conversations with people about a vision that is meaningful to them with diverse perspectives coming together, it takes some work. And so you've got to plan for time to do that. And then, where I go to see how well we're doing is 3 areas generally. I look at how people make decisions, solve problems, and integrate their work. And as an example, if you're in making decisions for inclusion, are you giving everybody a voice in that decision? And it doesn't mean everybody agrees. As a matter of fact, it's more helpful if there is disagreement, so you can debate different points of view, right? But it's important that everybody has a point of view and feels comfortable sharing that. And then on integrating work, most of us are part of a team of people that get things done for customers. So if something isn't done well or completely, are you going to that person and offering your help or not? And are they coming to you for help?
So if I could just maybe comment on something Eric said, because I think it's really important. I think it's one of the most important things is making sure that the message and the actions of inclusive leadership actually do penetrate into the organization. And I think that's really a challenge. And it's not because that the people leaders throughout the organization may not be committed to DEI. A lot of times it may be that, well, first of all, they're very busy doing, just what all of the things that they have to do during the day. But a lot of times they just don't know how. A lot of times they may be like me, where you grew up at a time where you had your personal life and your professional life and never the twain shall meet. And so you really have to learn how to, okay, this is now a different time, a better time, but then how do you start talking to people about their experiences? Are you overstepping in terms of asking them? So I think as leaders, we need to actually help other leaders within the organization who are actually having the day-to-day, even more impact on most of the employees. How do we help them become inclusive leaders, give them guides, whether it's, we actually at Jacobs did a guide in terms of inclusive leadership with just some, things, how you can say things, how maybe you shouldn't approach things. And then frankly, telling them what's expected of them and figuring out how to hold them accountable and making sure that they understand this is actually a very important thing for the organization and you are going to be held accountable for it.
Definitely. I think in some of my reporting and speaking with executives and people at all levels, there's really kind of that very important need for buy-in. People say, well, you lead from the top down, but I feel like when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion topics, you have to have that buy-in from your lowest middle manager all the way up to your CEO to your employees' boots on the ground. So that's something that I hear repeated quite often.
I love where you're talking about starting with the fact that personal life and professional life didn't meet. And now as we press together, really you can bring your authentic self to work. But particularly as the chief legal officer, and you and I kind of growing up in the legal world, I wanted to get your thoughts from a senior leadership perspective on the balance of risk management and DE&I. So I would say that we think about what you can and can't ask during an interview. You think of topics that are, legally not able to be addressed. And I would suggest that a lot of DE&I conversations could be viewed as too personal, so that as we move from professional to blending it with personal, as a senior leader, you must be very careful as to those conversations. And I think that may have a reverberation where it prevents the ability to truly demonstrate your DE&I leadership components with your team. I'd love you to touch on your thoughts where you talk about guiding your senior leaders on how to act, where you have shared some thoughts or seen some opportunity to enter those conversations that are often called uncomfortable conversations, but also from a legal perspective could be concerning just with broaching certain personal lines.
So a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think in interviews, you really have to stick to what's appropriate and not appropriate. And I think that that's really a place. Now, sometimes people may bring it up. I have I'm an ally card, in my office, which has the colors of the rainbow. So sometimes people will bring up their sexual orientation, and so you sort of take it from there. But I think you have to be really, really, really important there. I think in terms of others, you have to create the atmosphere so people do feel comfortable. And sometimes people won't feel comfortable. And I think you cannot press people to open up. You have to create the atmosphere so if there are these courageous conversations, that people can feel that there is the opportunity to actually, give their own experience and then listen without judgment. And then, leaders, I think, really who are part of those conversations and listening, it's got to be really important that, it's not only a safe space, but if they're opening up about something, you really have to check yourself in terms of whether so you're not taking any action based upon things that they may be saying that maybe just hit you the wrong way. It's a very tricky issue.
Julia or Eric, did you have anything that in your experience you've come across on that topic, kind of balancing these two things?
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, this last year, especially since George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I think the conversation has really opened up in the workplace very differently than it has in the past. And I actually led HR for about 15 years at TF, Toyota Financial Services, under that previous era, where, you didn't go to a lot of places in terms of various topics. But we had a lot of those kind of uncomfortable conversations in the workplace, and that stimulated a lot of individual conversation. But I think one of the things that's important is that, this is an individual journey for each of us, I think personally, but also as a companies in terms of where we are. And, having those kinds of conversations, it has been newer and each of us kind of learning and figuring that out. But as leaders, I think being willing to ask questions, be vulnerable about what you think you know or you don't know, or what it's okay to talk about and not okay to talk about, and just kind of being honest and open about that is important, because to help other people feel comfortable, I think a lot of times the leaders do need to go first, and show that we are all humans that connected at a certain level together, right? So I would just add that.
Yeah, and a couple other thoughts on that balance. So a few years ago, I was coming out of Boeing as a leader there. We were having the conversation of personal brand versus company brand and how those intertwine now more and more. And so what we had gotten to was we all really need to internalize the values and what they mean to us because the values shape the culture, which shape your brand, which shapes how you show up beyond your four walls of a company. And so we had started that conversation, and now with COVID and in the shift to digital, where you no longer experience brands so much in person, but it's more the digital interaction and in so many different ways, that how your values show up in your culture, which then extends into your brand and how you interact with customers and employees, is really important. And I think the recognition that who you are now, there are really no boundaries, and the digital divide is no longer there between within the four walls of the company as much as we want to believe it. So we've really got to be conscious of our values and how that plays out in our life in all aspects. And if we can work with, within the company and within leaders to help people have the conversations around our values, making sure that they incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then how that plays into all aspects of our lives, I think that's a start, just to allow us to be more true to ourselves and not have to transition in different parts of our lives.
I would love to hear a story about a time that each of you had to rethink your leadership practices to be more inclusive, because I think a lot of the leaders that I talk to, everyone's had those experiences. And I feel sharing those really helps other people realize that everyone does have those experiences. So, Eric, would you mind starting us off with a story?
Yeah, sure. I last summer when all the events around George Floyd hit, it really hit me, and I really wanted to understand the issues. And so I called up a few of my Black colleagues and pretty quickly learned that I was putting pressure on them to to understand and take the action. And so that was one of the quick pivots last summer when I wanted to see what I could do and learn more. And I realized that I need to put in the work myself, not put it on other people to do the work for me. And so I became very aware of how I engage with people that might be experiencing all kinds of racial and gender bias. And so to do that, I just started to be more aware in my environment as I engage around the community or wherever. And as you just listen and watch, you can see it. And I have my own bias that I've tried to work on, as Adam Grant talks about in his recent book. There's confirmation bias, which is seeing what you expect, and then there's a bias around what you want to see, and so desirability bias. And so I am an optimist by nature, and so I tend to see what I want to see, and so I really need to watch that, and especially as a leader, right? I need to be aware that although I have a lens of I see the upside of everything. Not everybody does, and how I behave and act in alignment with that can come across differently to people. And so I've come to understand that I really need to check myself a little bit and get some feedback on, are my, back to Joanne's point earlier, are my actions aligning with my words, or do I have a blind spot there? And so, those are a couple things, and understanding how do I really learn and engage in this topic without putting too much pressure on, the people that are really impacting and living it every day. And the second is really watch myself for that desirability bias and make sure that I've got some outlets where I can get that feedback.
Absolutely. Julia, can you think of a time that this has happened to you?
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear, Eric. I have that positivity thing too, so I got to watch myself. Well, so one of the things that comes to mind for me is we have done some inclusive leadership education at Toyota, and it was in the last maybe 12 to 18 months or so. And one of the things they talked about is, do kind of an audit of who are you mentoring, for example, and how diverse is that group, right? And so I realized at that time that, honestly, a lot of the people that I were mentoring were Asian females. They happened to be the people that reached out to me and connected with me. And I had, different folks too, in terms of both gender and ethnicity. But there was one group that of people, basically Latinx folks. I didn't have any in my mentoring relationships. And so I decided that I wanted to expand the diversity of my network, and actually proposed a kind of a reverse mentoring opportunity, and worked with our D&I group to do that. And they matched me with one of the leaders of our TODOS, which is our Hispanic business partnering group, for a mentoring relationship. And it's been a wonderful learning experience and a new relationship that I've been able to grow and learn from. So that's an example.
Absolutely. Joanne, did you have any thoughts on this topic?
So I do. This is something that has really been we're talking about learning experiences, a big learning experience for me, because it's really about what I've learned is that I do need to open up and not only ask questions, but really get into that uncomfortable space for me. And one of the examples I have is on the issue of pronouns. And I go back actually to when one of my daughters went to college in 2014, and she was talking about one of her friends who went to a college where they all said, when you introduce yourself with your name, and my pronouns are such and such and such and such. And she told me this story, and I actually was extremely dismissive, I am embarrassed to say now. And I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing, it's just one of these like foo-foo sort of colleges, and so glad they don't do that at the school you're going to. And I really do say that, very embarrassed now. So, fast forward 5-6 years, and this was something that was very important to our LGBTQ network. And as I said, I'm the executive sponsor of that. So I learned about it. I did my research. And so, talking about what Eric said, it's on us to learn about this. And it really became clear to me how important this is. And then we talked about, we could put them on our email signatures. We allow that, at the, people can do that if they want. It's not required. And I was kind of uncomfortable with that at first, because again, it just was like, okay, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it. But then I did it, and just really being out there and being visible with that and the difference that it makes. And so there's not only just that learning, but what I've also really come to understand is that being very vocal about this issue in the company and elsewhere, and not only your words, but your actions, actually has tremendous impact. I guess I come from the space where who cares about what I feel and what I have to say, and it's not going to make that much of a difference. But what I have seen is it has incredible impact. And I get emails from people just saying, thank you for showing up and talking about this. Thank you for doing this. It's made such a difference knowing that this is supported up at the very top levels of the company. And because of you, because of what the executive leadership team is doing, I feel comfortable to be my whole self. And I've never felt like this in my entire career. So if our words and our actions actually are having an impact, we talk about the pebble in the pond, and it just much more than many of us can ever appreciate. And it's truly, it's very powerful.
I think that's so true. That reminds me of actually one of our prior CEOs. I think he was really ahead of his time in terms of being a truly diverse and inclusive leader. And I remember him sharing a story early on about when he showed up at it was happened to be an LGBTQ event, and he had very similar feedback, and he shared that with us as leadership team and how impactful it was. And similar to you, Joanne, I grew up in that, you're sort of, it's not about me, right? It's about other things, and that. We've consistently got that kind of feedback about how important it is, even just to show up, right? To show support, that visible, active support.
So, Julie, I'd love for you to start on this question. I would love to hear about the group's thoughts and ideas on how you all ensure that your employees have the resources that they need and the equal opportunity to reach their full potential. What work are you doing in that area?
That's a big one. I've been with Toyota for over 30 years, and I feel very lucky to be at a company where the values of the company, and I feel like my values are really aligned. And I think that's really the main reason that I've been at the company for so long. And when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it starts with our founding principle of respect for people and continuous improvement. Those are kind of our two Toyota principles, both in terms of business, but also individual growth and learning. And so that's kind of embedded in our value system about team member development being an ongoing learning and expectation, and for leaders that they're expected to support and partner with their team members to do so. So we have, core diversity and inclusion training for all team members, sort of education and awareness, things like allyship training. Now we have this past year education, and then we have, I mentioned the inclusive leadership type of opportunity. And it goes back to, each of us are in individual places. So we tap into what's kind of makes sense for us individually working with our leaders. The other thing that's been just a tremendous resource is our employee resource groups, which we call business partnering groups at Toyota. We have dozens. I don't know the count right now, but they are super valuable in terms of people being able to find communities for connection, and also growth opportunities, opportunities to do things that they might not have in their normal course of work, whether that's, pulling together a speaker and working with various executives or people across the organization, and to do things they wouldn't have a chance to do, to develop. So that's a great resource as well. And I think we really look to our leaders. They have expectations around inclusive and diverse leadership. We each have kind of a diversity and inclusion scorecard that we are asked to work on each year, where we have individual goals. And part of that is, how we support our teams in terms of our leadership behaviors and role modeling, supporting team member education, and also things like supplier development and community engagement. So those kinds of things, we really look to our leaders to support our team members and meet them where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Joanne, anything that y'all are doing to make sure everybody has equal opportunities?
So a lot of similar things that Toyota is doing, Jacobs is doing. We have the ally and the advocacy training that we developed actually internally. So we made it, we tried to make it specific to Jacobs. One of the things that and the employee network groups are very important, not only because they have other people that they can relate to, and a lot of times similar experiences, but a lot of our employee network groups, we really talk about, okay, the career development and how they can get their sponsors, their mentors, and their coaches. We've all heard about, the differences there. So that's really important. Of course, we have leadership programs like a lot of companies do. We actually have last year did a leadership program for a lot of our top people of color in the company. And so that was really good, not only for them to be able to meet others throughout the company and develop those relationships, but to really be able to talk about things that they may experience that others do not. And again, I think one of the, going back to just holding our leaders accountable for and showing, what differences and how their inclusive leadership is actually translating into, tangible results, whether it's, more people within, the higher levels of the organization and what the numbers are. And in all of our reviews, we are held to account on that. And one of the things we instituted a couple of years ago was, as part of our executive compensation system, every VP and above actually has to have these non-financial goals. And there's 2 of them, and one of them has got to be one, our program is called Together Beyond, our D&I program. And so one of our non-financial goals that actually goes into our bonuses at the end of the year has got to be a Together Beyond inclusion goal.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a much larger conversation around tying compensation to these DEI goals that we could probably talk about forever. But Eric, I wanted to hear your thoughts on what you guys do.
Yeah, so on the resources side, I came out of Boeing, and we had an amazing set of resources to help our people grow and develop together, and an expectation to learn. And part of the reason I left Boeing to start Summit was because small and mid-sized companies don't have that. And the resources are one thing, but you also have to set the expectation environment where people are going to engage with those resources to learn, and that starts at the top. And so, for me, and as Julia mentioned, and lead by example and starting at the top, and it goes with the leader, and you have to show that you're willing, able, and are learning yourself. And you can do that by hosting conversations. So I've seen leaders do book clubs themselves. I've seen leaders send employees to an event and then share insights and then listen and learn and from employees. And then maybe the hardest one is to admit mistakes. Whereas if you're a leader and never admit mistakes or course corrections or what you got wrong, then you're not admitting that you're learning, because to learn you are essentially, you're admitting a mistake or that you didn't have all the information at a minimum. And to me, that's the hardest one. And to this day, a couple of weeks ago, I did that with my team. And as I got on the phone and was about to say, hey, I was wrong in this, in this situation, it's still uncomfortable, but that's a good thing. And so I think all that creates the culture of learning that then allows people to leverage resources. And then on opportunity, we've really started to rally around strength-based leadership. And so if you understand people's strengths, then you can help to guide and navigate opportunities that leverage those strengths. And then along with that, connecting people to learn from people that are different from them, which then builds learning agility. And we do that through job rotations or just rotations on what your role is on a project. And I think that really helps people to learn from each other, develop that learning agility, and leverage their strengths, which in my view, I've come to believe that that's the best way to help people maximize their opportunity and contribution to a company.
I guess because it's been on my mind a lot lately too. I think a conversation like this is one thing that I don't want us to miss, not that we're missing it, is the unintended sort of consequences of these conversations. And one of the things that I think leaders need to be really aware of is in talking about DE&I, some people actually feel alienated. Because, if you're focusing on whether it's women, people of color, LGBTQ, there are people that may not come into any of those, feel an affinity or connection with any of those groups. And they may feel, well, everything's going to be on them. So what's going to be the opportunity for me? And I've worked hard and I am not prejudiced. I am inclusive. I want everybody to do well. But now the actions that I'm seeing from leadership and from messaging is excluding me. And I think it's a challenge. And so I think that that's really something that all leaders need to continue to think about, and how to really create a safe space for those conversations to have as well, without people in those conversations being attacked. Because it really is about inclusion and belonging for everybody. And we have seen some comments back, to the effect that, I'm not feeling included now, and I've given, whatever it is, and I'm, equal. I believe in equality, but now I'm feeling excluded. So I think it's really a challenge and something that has got to be part of this whole conversation. I don't mean our conversation, but the whole conversation that is happening around DE&I.
And just with the last couple minutes here, I kind of wanted to open up the floor to see if there was anything else that you guys wanted to touch on in your inclusive leadership practices.
Yeah, maybe I'll just go back to the point that Joanne made. I think is a really important one, and that it does take all of us. And when we launched our business, our expectation was to create a more inclusive economy and focus on underserved communities. And what we realize is that we have to bring everybody together in that conversation. And kind of, as you've mentioned many times, Tom, and that's really hard to do. And what you realize, if you just empathize with people, everybody's got something going on. And oftentimes with their family or with their kids or whatever. And if you can just empathize with people to see them, and take that one moment to do that on your team, no matter who they are, then that's a connection where I think maybe maybe that's something that we've missed over the last year or two. Everybody requires a little bit of empathy, but not everybody has had the same opportunity, and so we do need to do some things differently. And it's not one or the other; it's got to be both. And so for me, it is, you know, all the conversations around it takes everyone. That is what most resonates with me, and that's what I run rally people around. And when we get stuck in kind of the day-to-day, what's in it for me, I always just try to bring people back up to, hey, I'm trying to create a more inclusive economy for my kids, right? There's a bigger shared purpose here that we can collectively align around. And yeah, our paths to get there may look a little bit different, and some a lot harder than others. So let's keep that higher purpose in mind, and then just keep talking, working together, and see what we can do to achieve that over time.
You know, I was just thinking, we've talked a lot about the importance of the leadership role and modeling from the top. And I wanted to share also and just encourage people in terms of the power of sharing an individual voice and being vulnerable, because when I think about like maybe some of the times when Toyota has had to kind of work through an issue and decide on a position to take, it's been the voices of our team members that have really helped us understand what the impact of something is to people personally, how important it is, and hearing those voices, the willingness of people to share their stories with those decision makers has been what has made the difference. And so I would just encourage people to use their voice and to lean into that, and you know, not underestimate the power that has.
I think Eric and Julia have said it just perfectly, and I'm taking notes, and I've learned so much just even from this conversation, and I think that's exactly right. And I guess the other thing I would say to all leaders is that you may not, the power that you have to actually affect change, don't ever lose sight of that. I mean, listen to people, but after you hear it, you know, just don't take it and just grow individually. Please do that, but take it, and because you do have the power to make the change. And I think that's really the key part of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for joining us as we talk about this being convert action, where we're talking about it, then converting it to action. Your willingness to share these lessons is key. What I heard consistently from Eric, Joanne, and Julia was that this is an individual reflection, whether it's understanding your bias, whether that's the confirmation bias, Eric, that you talked about, Joanne, you talked, and Julia, you know, indirectly about affinity bias, where you're mentoring Asian women potentially, and the intentionality of having that reverse mentoring component where you're learning at the top. Sometimes when we talk about top down, it screams hierarchical components, and that creates division. What I heard certainly throughout the conversation is that it's, particularly when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the importance of having that flat organization where we're all learning through that process. Joanne sharing the story of the pronouns, I certainly relate. You know, when you grow up where, you know, there are two choices consistently presented to you, male and female, and no one's presenting another choice. When that evolves, change hurts, because you have to rethink what has been, whether purposely or not, ingrained in your thought process. So I truly appreciate the vulnerability you share as leaders to go through that learning process. Encouraging all voices is key. That sense of everybody. When we talk about equity, Julia, I loved your analogy earlier around the boxes in the fence. You know, what happens is if we add boxes to one area, those that didn't receive a box, to Joanne's point, may feel excluded. And just being aware of that is key. And then lastly, and you all are reflecting this, the ability to drive change, just showing up, prioritizing this conversation when you have a lot of other aspects pulling at you. Long-winded way of me saying thank you for sharing your stories, and I think this is what really will drive change.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us, and we'll be back with another culture conversation soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.